now, I would think. So again, welcome to our R.M.Jones's Getting Your Lambing Right evening. Tonight we have again two speakers. If you were with us a couple of months ago for a beef meeting, you will have met them, which is Alison and Tommy. So I'll introduce them in a few minutes, but in the meantime, just a couple of things. We're going to start now, and the plan is to finish about 8:15, 8:20, with follow up with some questions then. Everyone is hopefully muted, and if you have on your screen, if you can see a way to turn off your camera, so if anyone shows up on a camera, you can click to turn your cameras off, and then it'll be easier to present the the number of presentations. Okay, we're going to take questions through the meeting. So in the top of your screen, you'll see a symbol with two people, and then to the right of that is a little speech bubble. If you click on that, that will allow you to to type out some questions. If you type them out, I'll be able to read them out during the course of the evening at various times. So we have two speakers tonight. First speaker is Alison Bond. Alison works for Rumenco, as Technical Sales Services Manager. Been there for 14 years. I rely on Alison quite a lot, send her lots of quirky nutrition problems I might have, and she'll fill in all the answers. Graduated from Harper Adams back in 2008 or 9, something like that, with a PhD. And Alison tonight will be talking us through ewe nutrition and how to get it right late lambing or late gestation and early post lambing, and how that improves lamb performance. And then we'll be followed up afterwards with Tommy Hefferman, our fast talking Irish vet. If you needn't slow down, just shout. Tommy was inspired to get into farming by watching a cow calve, which I thought was kind of weird because that would put most people off, I would have thought. He graduated from UCD in Dublin 18 or 19 years ago, I think. Spent time as a vet and managing a vet practice, did a Nuffield scholarship, and now works as a consultant to livestock farmers around the UK and Ireland, working hard to get the best of their businesses, really. And then Tommy will talk us through housing.
That's nice. It was like a great traffic junction, and this was the middle of the courtyard here.
Is someone else online? I think just make sure you click your mute off. That'd be great. And then getting the basics right on your farm business. As I said earlier, you can post questions anytime. Please do so, because the more questions, the better. So in the meantime, I will make way for Alison to make a start with her talk.
Super, thanks, John. I will just share my screen.
That's all there.
Perfect. Right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this evening. As John said, I'm going to kick off this evening by setting the scene a little bit, really from a sort of nutritional point of view, looking at that period as we approach lambing time. So we're going to start by looking at that late pregnancy period. We'll look at what's happening and how this affects our feeding during that period. I'll look at energy, protein sources during this time, and then the key minerals, vitamins and trace elements. So we know that forage will make up quite a large proportion of that pre-lambing diet. So it's quite important that we understand what's available on farm. So we'll look at that as well, and we can focus on what else might be required to help meet the requirements and ensure a healthy lambing, ensuring our lambs get off to that best possible start. We'll finish up by looking quickly at some of the nutritional options available to help balance those forages in the pre-lambing period, and look at what we should be looking at within these products when you're buying them to top up. So that late pregnancy through to lambing is quite a critical time in the sheep season. We know that up to 75% of ewe deaths and 70% of lamb deaths can occur during this short period of time. So quite a lot of cost can be incurred. We also know that in this last period of pregnancy, from day 90 to 145, over 70% of that fetal growth will occur. And this fetus, when it's 8 weeks pre-lambing, it only weighs about 800 grams. And if we look at a lamb being born at around 4.5 kilos, it's got quite a long way to go and a huge amount of growth and development to do in quite a short space of time to get that lamb ready for birth. And this puts a lot of stress on our ewe, and it pulls a large amounts of nutrients from her diet, increasing her requirements for energy and protein, During this time, the udder will also be developing, and the feeding regime in particular will be influencing that colostrum quality. And we know that nutrition from mid-pregnancy onwards is a key driver of colostrum quality and quantity. And colostrum is that all-important first feed that provides high energy, as well as good levels of immunoglobulins, enzymes, hormones, growth factors, and endocrine factors. A thin sort of pale colostrum might indicate poor pre-lambing feeding, whilst a thick yellow colostrum will suggest the ewes been well fed. The higher the quality, the higher the immunoglobulin level. And these immunoglobulins, they help fight against disease, and they provide the newborn lamb with its early immunity. So that colostrum is absolutely key. So feeding well during that late pregnancy and getting it right is so important. As we've already mentioned, that ewe's energy and protein requirements will be increasing really rapidly, more than doubling for those that might be carrying twins. But as that lamb grows and takes up more room inside, our ewe's appetite will be reducing by about 30%. So it's really important to increase the nutrient density of the ration to keep pace with that fetal growth. And any sort of undernutrition of ewes in that later pregnancy has been shown to have some quite big effects on things like lamb birth weight and survival rate, udder weight, mammary development, so therefore that colostrum, that milk yield, milk quality. You can have a weakened ewe-lamb bond if your ewes weak after giving birth. We can increase the risk of things like pregnancy toxemia and reduce lamb growth going forward as well. So this is a really old shot, but I think it still it speaks well really of what's going on. This picture here we have on our left. This big black hole here, I suppose, is our ewes rumen. So this is a barren ewe. She's carrying no lambs, and you can see that her rumen is taking up almost 2/3 of her abdominal space. If we move over to this picture here, this is our twin bearing ewe. She's 100 days through gestation, so about 7 weeks pre-lambing, and we can see her rumen here is much smaller, and this is due to it basically being squashed by her growing lambs. So here are our twin lambs here. So as they're growing, they're basically pushing that rumen up. So whilst her nutritional requirements are increasing, her ability to eat is decreasing by the day. So our key message really being that ewe's intake is reduced at a time when she has an even greater demand for energy and nutrients. And I think this is really nicely shown in this graph here. And it shows that potential negative energy balance that a ewe might find herself in later pregnancy. So our red line here that's sneaking up in this later stage of pregnancy is demonstrating the ewe nutrition requirements. So we can see they're going up as we end our pregnancy. This blue line, however, is showing her physical capacity to consume food. And we can see that as pregnancy progresses, that line is going down. This green shaded area here represents then your potential gap that our ewe might have in her requirements for nutrients. So reduced levels of energy, protein, vitamins and minerals on that approach to lambing. So we really want to be managing this gap in those later stages of pregnancy by feeding a well-balanced diet. So if we can minimize this gap, I suppose, then we're heading in the right direction. So from mid-pregnancy onwards, we should be feeding the ewes with a couple of key aims, therefore, in mind. It's extremely important to maintain body condition score. We talk a lot about body condition score around tupping time, but it's absolutely key still throughout pregnancy all the way through to pre-lambing. Body condition scoring can be a very useful management tool for sheep farmers. I say it can be because it's important that it is used to manage flock nutrition. And group animals accordingly and feed them accordingly. So very simple manual assessment of the muscle and fat cover over the spine behind that last rib in the loin area of the sheep. Very easy to learn, highly repeatable when the same person assesses the flock regularly. And I would imagine most of you sat out there now listening are putting your hands on sheep's backs, but whether you're actually using that information to look at the nutrition, I'm not sure. So one condition score is equivalent to about 10 to 13% of body weight. So in our 70 kilo ewe, which is an average sort of size ewe, this would equate to around 7 to 9 kilos of weight. So if she loses one condition score, we need to put 7 to 9 kilos of weight back on. We know that maintaining that ideal body condition score around mid-pregnancy and through to late pregnancy is really important for full placental development as well. So that full placenta weighs about 1 kilo, and it's really, really key for supplying the nutrients to our developing fetus. If it doesn't reach its full size around mid-pregnancy, and if it's not maintained, then it can have some severe detrimental effects on lamb birth weight and then subsequent survival and growth rates as well. And this can put lambs at risk of higher mortality following that maternal undernutrition in mid-pregnancy. We know that the Ewe body condition score at lambing in particular has quite a big effect on lamb weight at 8 weeks of age and reproductive ability of the female lamb as well. Thin ewes tend to be quite poor mothers, and there's also evidence of longer term detrimental effects on undernutrition at this time in terms of that future reproductive ability of the female lamb, as well as the ewe's milking and rearing ability. And this is probably because during this period from mid-pregnancy, this follicular or reproductive organs are developing in the fetal female lamb. So the unborn lamb, her reproductive organs are developing. And if mum is underfed, then her reproductive organs are not going to develop as well. And so this can affect lifetime performance. And this is work that's being done by AHDB now, their Challenge Sheep project, and it's looking at sort of the longer term effects of undernutrition. And they're finding some really interesting stuff as well. So we're also wanting to reduce the risk of metabolic diseases such as twin lamb disease, as well as reducing worm challenges. We want to support the ewe so she can support her lamb through good quality colostrum, ensuring good lamb birth weight, reduced mortality and good lamb vigour as well. So how do we go about achieving these aims? Well, as our ewe approaches lambing, that diet balance is quite crucial. We want it to be there to prevent problems occurring. And in general, ewes have fundamental requirements for energy, protein and an adequate supply of a wide range of mins, vits and trace elements. So energy is probably the first most important nutrient, and it's provided by your sugars and your starch and your fibre in the diet. And it's really important to provide a selection of different types of energy in your diet. We want this quickly digested sugar. So this would come from something like molasses, gives you an instant energy boost. We want a slightly slower digested starch type energy, which you might get from things like cereals. This helps to maintain energy levels over a longer period. And then finally, we want a digestible fibre source, something like sugar beet pulp. This is a really long lasting energy source, but it also helps to keep the rumen healthy as well, keep those bugs healthy. So we measure energy in the amount of megajoules that are required per ewe per day. And the requirements of ewes varies quite widely depending on the stage of production. There's lots of really great information and tables available there to help determine a ewe's energy requirements on that approach to lambing according to her breed, according to the lambs being carried. But in general, a ewe will need about 8 megajoules of energy per day for maintenance. However, if she's got twins, then her energy requirement will almost double to 16 megajoules per day approaching lambing. And we must meet these energy requirements or we're going to have metabolic issues such as twin lamb disease. Again, demonstrates the importance of understanding the diet you've got on farm and what you're feeding, and looking to perhaps group animals to manage them according to their requirements as well. So our second important nutritional element in the diet as lambing approaches is protein, and our ruminant animals are quite unique in how they source their protein. They get their metabolizable protein, which is basically the total protein that they need, and it's the true protein that they absorb from the intestine, and therefore available for animal maintenance, growth, production, lactation. They get it from 2 sources. So working backwards, this is our crude picture of our intestines of the ewe. So this is her intestine down here, and this is where she's going to absorb her metabolizable protein from. But our first source is microbial protein. This is produced by our microbes in the rumen, and this is produced through the breakdown of non-protein nitrogen, so things like urea protein, and rumen degradable protein, otherwise known as RDP. And it relies on a source of energy, and it takes you through this fermentation process and produces this microbial protein. And this protein, in combination with the microbes themselves that will die and are washed out of the rumen, makes up about 60 to 75% of that metabolizable protein supply or total protein supply that our animal can make use of. So we need our rumen to be functioning really well for this process to be at its optimum. The remainder of that metabolizable protein will come from digestible undegradable protein, or DUP. And this protein, in essence, is untouched by the rumen microbes. It's pretty much protected, and instead sort of being broken down here in the rumen, it travels almost straight through the rumen and joins that metabolizable protein pool at the end, where it can be digested and used by the animal. So we know over the last couple of years, we've been pushing our animals a little bit harder. We're wanting more from them. We're breeding them better. And that means that our ewe metabolizable protein requirements are steadily increasing. And in particular, our ewes with multiple lambs will have this higher protein requirement. And it's unlikely that we can actually produce any more microbial protein. So that's going to leave us with a shortfall and puts greater emphasis on this digestible undegradable protein, which must be used to make up that shortfall. And so when we're starting to look at ewe diets, it's really important that we look at that digestible and degradable level of the diet, which is actually probably more important at this stage of pregnancy than just a general crude protein, because it gives us an idea of the quality of that protein, and that really good quality protein is so important for helping to promote colostrum production and milk. So it's really important to remember that not all proteins are the same, and this is particularly important in that pre-lambing diet. So crude protein is not enough of an analysis when looking at diet components, and so we need to know how much DUP is being supplied, and you should be able to get hold of that information. So by all means, speak to your supplier, make sure that they're providing all that information. So ewes should be offered good quality protein on the approach to lambing to provide plenty of that DUP, to make sure they've got plenty of that total metabolizable protein. Soybean meal is quite an example of a good quality protein for ewes. It has a high level of total protein, usually between 48 and 54%. And within that protein, approximately 33% is DUP protein. So it also has an excellent amino acid profile and a good energy level at 14 ME. So it's got really good digestibility, palatability and availability. And we would tend to be recommending, in alignment with a lot of the data that's out there, to be feeding about 100 grams of soya per lamb carried in those final weeks of pregnancy, alongside good quality forage. So your twin lambing ewe, she's going to be needing 200 grams of soya alongside her really good quality forage. So what about our key minerals, vitamins and trace elements? Although there are only 100 minerals in life, it's estimated that only around 40 may have metabolic roles in the body. And some of these are required in such minute amounts that it's extremely rare they'll be deficient under normal practical conditions. Within this group, there are 15 elements that we know in particular are required by cattle and sheep for good health and productivity. So we know that they're required in relatively small amounts compared to, for example, your protein and your energy. However, they have a disproportionate effect on animal performance. They're involved in all aspects of body function, and therefore deemed to be essential. And minerals, vitamins and trace elements will all interact with each other as well. So we need to be considering a total mineral supply to ensure that rations are balanced, rather than just ones that we're picking out of interest. However, I'm just going to pick out a couple of interest this evening, because we'd be here all night if I went through all 15 of them. Vitamin E is an essential antioxidant that helps animals fight off disease. It helps protect cells from the damage that occurs during normal production. Now, in our pregnant ewe, vitamin E will not easily pass across the placenta to the lamb during pregnancy. So lambs will therefore rely on their vitamin E requirement from the ewe's colostrum and milk after birth. So it's important that mum has plenty of vitamin E in pregnancy so that her milk and her colostrum have good levels as well. And trials have shown that lambs with elevated vitamin E and selenium status tend to stand and suckle earlier, thus improving lamb vigour and survivability. So vitamin E is also important for our ewe as well, because it plays an important role in the immune system and can be involved in the prevention of issues such as mastitis. Mastitis is caused by the ingress of bacteria into the ewe's teat ends and up the teat canal into the udder. And vitamin E is involved in a process where white blood cells will engulf and eat those bacterial cells, and thus reducing the risk of mastitis from bacteria. If we move on to look at selenium, selenium works alongside vitamin E But newborn lambs are at risk of hypothermia, so they need to maintain their body temperature to present this, and a newborn lamb must produce as much heat as it is losing to the environment. So if you lamb outside and there's lambs being born onto cold ground, they can be losing quite a lot of heat quite quickly. And if it doesn't produce that heat, its body temperature will fall, resulting in hypothermia. So lambs will shiver, and this helps them create heat, but that shivering requires energy. So at first, before our lamb has received colostrum, the lamb must still maintain its body temperature. And this is where the brown fat comes in. The brown fat is this little kind of hot water bottle that the lamb is born with, and it's mobilized and broken down immediately after birth. And this occurs very efficiently and very quickly. And this reaction produces a lot of heat, which keeps the lamb warm. Now, this process is known as non-shivering thermogenesis. But there's only a really small amount of brown fat there. It should be sufficient to heat the lamb, to last it until the lamb stands up and suckles, and then the lamb will have the energy available to shiver, to keep warm. But this whole process is actually selenium dependent. So unlike vitamin E, selenium will pass through the placenta, and it is therefore transferred in utero. So our ewe needs to be selenium, well, if she's selenium deficient, then our lamb will be selenium deficient, and then that risks that whole shivering and brown fat process not happening, and therefore getting our lamb off to a bad start. So zinc occurs widely throughout the body, with the greatest concentration in skin, wool, hair and horn. It's involved in a lot of biochemical processes, and a deficiency will affect quite a wide range of body functions. In particular, it's involved in the synthesis and metabolism of proteins, carbohydrates and nucleic acids. So this makes it essential for skin, bone, hair, wool and foot health. So due to its importance in tissue health, it also plays a really important role in wound healing, but also gut health and the immune system, as well as being involved in cell membrane structure and function. So levels in forages tend to be quite low, so supplementation is required. And also daily utilization and excretion will also rapidly deplete body stores. So it's really important that your supplement coming up to lambing contains zinc as well, to help support that tissue health and help those animals build their immune function. And then finally, the last one I want to talk about this evening is cobalt. Cobalt has quite an important biological role as a constituent of vitamin B12, which is manufactured by those microorganisms in the rumen. So due to its role in B12, the animal's actual requirement for cobalt is quite low, but the microbes have a big requirement. And cobalt itself is involved in the nervous system and integrity, and levels of cobalt above that needed for vitamin B12 production may help improve digestion of poor quality feeds in the rumen. And so it's been linked to fibre digestion and therefore feed efficiency as well. So it's quite an important trace element. And it's also been shown to be important for ewe fertility, and works demonstrated that it can benefit lamb vigour as well. So let's move on to look at our ewe diet as we approach lambing. The key ingredient will almost always be some kind of forage, whether it be grazing, silage or hay. And that forage is the cheapest feed on the farm. So we should be basing those diets around this key ingredient and maximising those intakes. And this is really the healthiest way to feed stock as well, to help maintain that rumen health. However, to ensure that optimum usage, it's really important to know what is available on the farm and make sure we have that forage analysed, and then we can balance the diet around it. So this slide here shows the ideal silage for sheep. Sheep like really quite dry, well-made silage, and this ensures that optimum intake. The better the quality, the more the ewe can eat. In later lactation, a ewe will eat a maximum of between 2 and 2.5% of her body weight in dry matter. So this equates to 1.4 to 1.75 kilos in dry matter. And at least 60% of this should be from forage, which roughly speaking equates to around a kilo dry matter. So the better the quality, the more nutrition she'll get from her kilo. Excuse me. So we're looking for silages around this sort of 10.5 and above in energy, and 12% protein as well. So there's data to show as forage quality improves from straw with an ME of around 6.5 through to good quality silages of around 10.5 and 11.5, we can see that our ewe can eat a much larger volume. In other words, a larger percentage of her body weight as forage. I think down at 6.5 ME, that's straw, they'll eat maybe about 0.8%, whereas that really good high quality silages, they're eating about 1.8%. So our key message really is to feed as good a quality forage as possible to maximise those intakes. How else might we be able to maximise intakes on the approach to lambing? Well, further work has demonstrated that actually the way you present the silage can affect the amount eaten and therefore the amount of cake required to top up. So precision chopped silage resulted in lower cake requirements in the last 6 weeks of pregnancy, and this was thought to be due to easier eating, meaning that forage intakes were increased. Also, improvements in dry matter digestibility will also affect requirements. So obviously chopping bales isn't always possible, but if feeding whole bales, make sure that there's plenty of access for all animals to make sure that they're encouraged to take what they need, allowing plenty of feed space per ewe, plenty of trough space for ewe, and then consider maybe grouping ewe lambs separately. They have a higher requirement, they're still growing, but they may also be the shyer feeders as well. So give them opportunity to take what they need. And make sure you're monitoring intakes as well against predictions. If you're putting a bale out, have an idea of what that bale weighs and have an idea about how long it's lasting. So how much those ewes are eating. And then you can be going back to your analysis and getting a real feel for what's going on. And this just ensures that animals are taking what you think they are. And don't forget water as well. Water will help improve intakes. So use on a drier diet with one of those really dry big bale silages, they might need up to 4.5 litres of water per day, whilst your moister silage based diets, that water requirement is down as low as 2 litres. I just wanted to show you before we move on away from our forage, the importance of knowing forage quality as you move that bit closer to lambing by using a bit of an example. So here we have our 70 kilo ewe. She's carrying twins and she's 3 weeks pre-lambing. And we know that from table values that she needs about 15.3 megajoules of energy per day. If we assume she eats about 1 kilo dry matter of forage, and then we come down here and we look at our forages. So if we have a 9.7 ME grass silage, she requires about 5.6 megajoules. That's our shortfall between our 15.3 and our 9.7 that's being supplied from the forage. So this is going to be about 450 grams of compound based on a 12.5 ME. That's what she's going to need in that last 3 weeks. However, if our silage is 11.1 grass silage, then her shortfall is only 4.2 megajoules. And this means she only needs about 350 grams of compound feed. So 100 grams difference per day per ewe by just having your silage analysed and understanding completely what's going on farm. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got 100 ewes, that's nearly a quarter of a tonne of saving in compound feed just by understanding your forage and just feeding according to what she needs. And that's not taking into account the issues you can cause by overfeeding or underfeeding. So as animals approach lambing, the majority of the time that forage will need some kind of supplementation. And this usually takes the form of a compound feed, a ewe nut, and this will substitute some of the forage. In other words, the more compound feed you feed, the less forage that will be eaten. Now, there's a lot of choice available when it comes to compound feeds, and many maybe don't hit the mark, or they're perhaps least cost formulated so they can change. But there's a couple of things that it's probably quite important to look at and to understand. So you want a minimum ME of 12 to 12.5 megajoules. It must be higher than the forage ME. And we want good quality ingredients to achieve this, such as cereals, and your supplier should be quite happy to provide a full formulation, including that list of ingredients as well. You want good quality protein in there. You want to ask about the protein breakdown, that DUP value, and you want a good mineral and vitamin profile as well. This is particularly important if you're not going to feed any other supplement out there as well. You want to make sure you've got a consistent formulation going through that last 6 weeks. And just be aware of certain things on the label. You want your oil level to be below 5%. Too much oil in there can be used to try and push the ME up, but it's not particularly good for the rumen bugs. They don't like that high level of oil. You don't want too high levels of ash. This is an indication of your mineral levels, and obviously you want a good mineral balance in there, but you don't want them to be filling with cheaper ingredients. You want a good level of fibre in there. That's really important for rumen health as well. And just be aware that your list of ingredients will be shown in descending order of inclusion rate. So you want your good quality ingredients to be up the top of that list. And don't rule out supplementary feeds such as blocks, buckets and liquids as well, and protein meals. If you've got really good quality forages, a free access supplementary feed may be enough, enabling either concentrate to be completely not fed at all or a lot less being fed. Perhaps you've got singles in really good condition, and you can at least decrease the quantity required and for how long it's fed. So your free access supplements such as blocks and buckets, they have a different mode of action to feeding compound. They offer a little and often feeding approach similar to grazing, which is really beneficial for the animals and very different from compound feed. Supplementary feeding very much complements the available forages and helps animals get the most from them. It offers feed available 24/7, and that helps prevent bullying and promotes performance as well in this later period. No troughs are needed. They're very weatherproof, convenient, labour, time saving, and offer proven performance as well. And they often have a full specification of minerals and vitamins in there too. And if you've got homegrown cereals, maybe consider a home mix, a protein meal that gives you a nice flexible option when you're feeding, and you can manage your protein source yourself. So that's me. Now I'm going to pass over to Tommy, but just leaves me to thank you again for joining us this evening. And if you've got any questions, pop them in the box and we can have a discussion at the end.
Well, listen, thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Two have come on my text and one is on the screen. So I'll read the screen one out first, which is, how long does it take you to produce B12 after cobalt supplementation?
Sorry, I missed that. Say that again, John. I didn't quite hear it.
How long does it take you to produce B12 after cobalt supplementation?
Oh, it's quite a quick process. Cobalt will disappear quite quickly, and so it is quite a quick process. Tommy, I don't know whether you know time-wise. I just, all I know is that it's quite a quick process.
Yeah, cobalt is broken down to B12, and I think what I would see in cobalt deficiency, if you're seeing it, that you're probably better off, because it could take 24 to 48 hours before you see a shift, that you're better off supplementing with cobalt and B12 to make up the short gap, is what I would say, because it takes a little bit of time for the microbes to break down the B12 to get to the liver to act on that cycle. So but with more long-term supplementation, you know, it's not such a challenge. But if you're looking at cobalt deficiency, I would be always going with B12 and a cobalt product, maybe to start off a liquid drench.
Super.
Okay, thanks for that, Tommy, Alison. And the next one to come on my text was, if outdoor lambing just with singles, can they get away with blocks, energy blocks?
Yeah, as long as they're in good condition and as long as they've got a good bite of forage in front of them. If they've got grazing outside, you might want to top up with some big bales or some extra forage out there. But yes, certainly singles works really well for them, just on a block.
Okay, and the next one was, someone's got really high protein silage, 16.5 protein.
Wow.
Is that going to supply the right sort of protein for the ewes without having to buy any soya or any soya-based protein to go into the ration?
No, unfortunately, a lot of that protein will be rumen degradable protein. So it's great to have that good level of protein in there, and it will help the rumen bugs. And it will be really important to balance that protein with a good energy source, because those bugs need a balance of protein and energy to make use of that. So that will be really important, to make sure that there's some energy going in to make use of that rumen degradable protein. But unfortunately, you will probably still need a little bit of digestible undegradable protein to balance it all up.
Okay, well, there's a follow-up to that one as well, which is, can we grow proteins on farm that can supply higher levels of DUP? So I would imagine the person who's texting me this is thinking about peas or beans, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, they've all got reasonably good levels of DUP, and they can certainly be used to balance. And I mean, soya, we talk about soya a lot, but let's be honest, at the moment, it's a little bit like the devil's food. And it works really well and it does a really good job, but it's getting a lot of bad press. So we are starting to look at at protein sources that have been grown a little bit closer to home, and there's been work done on rape, really successfully looking at rape, and then there is work on peas and beans, and certainly I've done diets for guys using peas and beans instead of soya, and it's not quite as good in terms of its DUP value, but it has got quite a sensible value.
Okay, that's good. I can talk to people about that on farm now. That's good. Yeah, the last question is probably for me, really, which is, do R.M.Jones offer a nutrition service? We do. If you want to talk about nutrition or about forages or putting rations together, please give us a call. We can help with that. I think we're going to do with the questions there for a minute, and I'm going to pass over to Tommy. Tommy, you might have to go really steady because you're a very quick speaker.
Yes, no problem, John. Actually, behind my computer here, I have a big sign saying "Slow down, Tommy." Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can.
Excellent. Okay, I'll get started, and I'll bear that in mind that obviously, as John introduced me there, I'm over on the other side of the Irish Sea here, and I am known to get very excited and talk a little fast. First of all, thanks to the team in R.M.Jones for having me along this evening, and Alison and the team in Rumenco as well. So I like the title for tonight, Getting Lambing Right for Flock's Sake. So I'm going to try and go through some key things that I think are really important as we approach lambing time. So just a quick bit of background on myself. I'm a vet based here in Ireland. I suppose I'm also from a part of Ireland where there's a lot of sheep down in County Kerry. And in practice here in Wicklow for 15.5 years, I dealt with a lot of sheep. So I had a big interest in sheep. And I really started, I suppose, as a young vet, looking at the individual animal. And then I realized that there was a lot to be gained from a flock-based approach. I got really interested in nutrition, and I suppose since leaving veterinary practice, I've got quite interested in how we grow those forages, and I'm really interested as well, maybe sort of a side hobby from the veterinary, and how agriculture is going to go forward over the next decade or so, particularly around the role of animal protein in the human health story. And I think we have a really good story, particularly in sheep farming and the quality of product we produce. I do a lot of work on farm, and I suppose in the middle is my farm work. I'm very interested in immunity, quite interested in this whole area of the microbiome. I'm interested, and you'll probably see it tonight and from the last talk if people were there, I'm really interested about the way we develop systems for our animals and understanding the biology and needs of those animals to improve the production systems. So it's about balancing a lot of those interests. I've also a big interest, I suppose, in how farming is going to develop, and the big conversation will be, I think, with livestock production, will be the environment and the environmental impacts. And I think we have a really good story in sheep farming. I think, look, you have to mention COVID-19. It's been an incredibly difficult time. We're in our second lockdown over here, and it's been a real difficult time for people. But we'll probably see a lot of trends pre-COVID been accelerated, particularly with a focus on how we produce our livestock. I'm also involved in, I know sheep farmers don't want to hear about dairy cows, but I'm involved in 2 dairy farms myself, and we've set up a 5-year project. And I suppose the relevance for the farming system is important. I'm really interested in how we set up systems on farm to make things easier. I'm really interested in the whole space about soil and biodiversity as well. And I do believe we're in the business of human health. I think, you know, one of the big shames for me is that we talk about environmental challenges, and one of the greatest products that's been underutilized and some farmers are giving away for free is wool. But anyway, that's a side note. I suppose I did an off-field scholarship, and part of that scholarship was looking at an animal-centered approach. And I believe that if we can look after the biological needs of animals and systems, we can have more productive and better performance for them. So in farming systems, the way I look at it, and if we look at our timeline of lambing across from the beginning, as Alison went into such detail there on our pre-lambing, it's all about, to me, looking for weaknesses in the system when I go in to look at a flock health. It's looking for weak links, and they're always going to be there. That's the nature of farming, is there are going to be challenges. Some of them are out of our control, like the weather. But if we can identify weak links and strengthen them up, we can have a better flow to our system in lambing. And sometimes when these weak links are early on, like a feeding and nutrition problem maybe in our flock, we can really see the impact of that throughout lambing. I suppose when we look at sheep farming and I look at farming systems, I do look at it from I've gone away from the individual animal to looking at farm performance and looking at metrics that we measure. And, you know, we often talk about scanning percentage, lambing percentage, or maybe lamb sold percentage. I often say scanning percentage is for vanity and lamb sold is sanity. But tonight I'm going to really focus in on the losses that occur from scanning to 48 hours. Some of the other metrics that seem to be becoming more and more important, and rightly so, is antibiotic usage per kilo of live weight on farming systems, with the need to reduce antibiotic. And I think sheep farms have a really good story there. Again, production and environmental sustainability. There's a lot of conversations about this, but we need to set some targets. And of course, in flocks, when we're looking at lambs, looking at our daily live weight gain is a key metric to driving performance. So we do need some records, and the research is telling us very definitely between scanning and 48 hours, 79% of losses are occurring at this time. Okay, and up to 50% of those losses are occurring in the first 48 hours. And maybe some of you have seen ADHB's webinar last week, where they talked about an Edinburgh study which concluded very similar statistics again around lamb mortality in the first 48 hours. First 7 days it was 9.4%. So it's really an important time, and it's where we still see losses. And this is a significant cost on your farms if you want to put it into monetary terms. You know, if we're scanning with a scanning rate of 2 and we have a lamb 1.6 after 48 hours, that's 40 lambs across 100 ewes. And, you know, when you put in costs together, it's estimated to be £25 per lamb. It could be even more. But this is a significant period that we need to focus on. So what I do on farms is, you know, I do need to go in and measure some metrics to see where we are. I like to try and keep it as simple as possible. So where are your losses? And it's sometimes we don't always have those records to go on. And what I try and get people to do is set up some sort of a recording system, like a large whiteboard. They're about 35 or 40 pounds. Put that up in the lambing shed, have a few pens, and start recording even lambs born dead, lambs born lost in the first 48 hours. Set up a bit of a recording system so you can track performance on the farm. And I go back to this, and it's easy to say it on a webinar, but you know, being brilliant at the basics, really consistency, looking at the simple things and doing them well. On my right hand side there is a checklist I use, and don't worry too much about the detail, but what it's about is looking at all the links in the chain and really recognizing that most farms do so many things well, but identifying some risks on the farm. And it's about progress over perfection often, because we'll often solve a lameness problem and the following year weather might cause problems, we might get joint-ill issues. So it's about continuously improving. I think just to really important to re-emphasize from a lamb performance perspective, the impact of ewe nutrition coming up to lambing time is so key. It has such an impact on lamb performance and lamb survival. You know, even that overly conditioned ewe, that difficult lambing, that can impact. Even your thin ewe, you know, the impacts a thin ewe can have in the lamb in utero, as Alison described, and then at lambing time, even her ability to mother. And really for me, if you remember nothing else from tonight, colostrum quality. I'm a real fan of, you know, there's very few things sometimes we can do, but getting nutrition right to aid colostrum quality from a lamb survival point of view is really, really big. Maybe it can come up for discussion at the end, but I have my own theories as well around hypocalcemia or low blood calcium, around slow lambings and maybe their role in prolapses, a continuous problem, you know, that I often have conversations with farmers about. And again, Alison said it there again, but selenium, iodine and copper, getting them right in the ewe for the young unborn and the newborn lamb is really critical. Again, things that can affect our flocks at this time of year, that can affect lambing percentages, of course, abortions. None of us want to see that pile of lambs in an abortion outbreak. It's a really big challenge, and it does occur on farm. And I suppose when we do see abortion storms, we've got to remember, and I always go back to, I suppose, basics and understanding that, you know, some of these agents are zoonotic, meaning, you know, particularly if there's pregnant women involved in the lambing shed, be very careful. But, you know, there's certain things we can and can't do, and whether it's most commonly we see a lot of toxoplasmosis or chlamydial abortion, it's good to know what's causing the abortion, because there's certain things we can do, certainly with chlamydial abortion, and it's about planning for the future to try and prevent it again. Again, we see a lot of lameness indoors at this time of year when you're lambing indoors. It's simply because a lot of the bacterium that cause our foot rots our scald and our cod, they like this environment, the damp, mild, wet environment, and sheep closer together. So it can have a big impact on intakes. We must remember how painful lameness is. And, at a time when we don't want anything affecting intakes in our ewe, and a stress will affect colostrum quality as well, and their ability to mother and take up with lambs. So if we're seeing lameness issues, I always say to people, first and foremost, try and focus on hygiene, looking at foot bathing before lambing. I find these batch foot baths in the bottom picture, they work really well. Again, there's a really good vaccination for foot rot if that's a challenge in your flock, and taking action early. And don't forget to focus on, and I look at a lot of lambing sheds and calving sheds and different sheds, simple things like getting drainage right, underfoot conditions. If you are using straw as a bedding like most people were, just using that extra bit of straw at high pressure or pinch points. Again, I know this is very basic, but I'm all about being prepared. What do you need ahead of lambing? It's a great time to, go into the likes of John and the guys and see, look, get your stocks ready for lambing time, having the important essential tools, and having ability to, what do I need? When do I need them? And even setting up your lambing pen, that everything has a place, and everything there's a structure and a flow to the system. And I think this works really well. And that's something I try and do on farms, is a type of lean management approach to make life a little bit easier. When it comes to lambing time, look, most shepherds and farmers are brilliant at what they do around lambing. And I suppose when I was in practice for many years, I did a lot of difficult lambings. And it took me 5 years, unfortunately, to realize this, 5 years qualified, that a sheep is a precocious species. They're a species of prey. And we often do the sheep an injustice by saying that a sick sheep is a dead sheep. That's because the sheep is so good at hiding pain, and because they're waiting for the predator. So if we think about lambing times, particularly the difficult lambing, when I started using painkillers routinely during difficult lambings, it transformed the results I was seeing. So it's just something that for the ewe's sake. And again, when it comes to lambing, knowing what the normal is, working with the ewe. So sometimes we'll see in the picture down here, we tend to, particularly in those harder lambings, spend a lot of time maybe digitally manipulating the outer vulva and maybe not giving the ewe enough time. There's 3 stages to lambing. When the lamb's head and legs are in that canal, the lamb is quite safe. So, just working with the ewe, giving her a little bit of time, and lubrication is very important. And obviously small hands also help. None of us like wearing gloves at lambing time, and I'm going to make a case for gloves later on, but I think they're important to protect ourselves, but also protect the ewe, and plenty lubrication. And one thing that we probably don't do, and from some of the diseases I'll talk about in a few minutes, and unfortunately we've all become experts at this right now, is hand washing. We must think about what infections can we be spreading from ewe to ewe or ewe to other lambs. It's something to think about. So maybe making hand washing facilities easy to use in our sheds. It's a simple thing. Again, one of the questions I often get asked about is ring room. And again, I don't have any magic solutions, and I don't think anyone's cracked why it occurs, but I would always be very cautious through, unfortunately, my getting it wrong early in my career, is not to go too hard on those hard ringworm cases. If they're not responding to digital manipulation in 5 minutes, you're going to do a lot more damage. Again, on lamb resuscitation, we really need to work on those weaker lambs, and just cold water in the ear, even getting them up in the chest, making sure we try and resuscitate them as quickly as possible. When I go on to a farm or a flock, every visit I've gone back to really simple basics, and I try and think about 2 things. I'll start on one side, I'll look at immunity. What can we do to make sure immunity is as high as it can be, particularly our newborn lambs? And then on the other side, I want to reduce down infection pressure. And infection pressure is the levels of bacteria or pathogens our animals are exposed to. So when we think about infection pressure, hygiene is really critical. The immunity story always nearly starts and ends with colostrum. And I spent 1.5 years working as an animal health specialist with our local agri-media, the Farmers Journal here in Ireland. And I know from talking to groups and groups of farmers about colostrum that people kind of glaze over, not another colostrum story. But again, it's you know, even from that Edinburgh study, it's still has the biggest impact on lamb survival. You know, it's a really key area to work on. And colostrum, it's key to understand, and we know this, the lamb is born immunonaive. It needs to get its immunoglobulins, its immunity from its mother's first milk. It also gets that critical energy. You know, colostrum is 15% fat. It's also a gut lubricant. And, you know, some of the research coming out on colostrum now is that the young lamb's gut is like a sponge to soak up these immunoglobulins, but it's also not fully developed. And there's all these hormones and growth factors in there that impact the young lamb's gut there and then, but also future performance. So it's really, really key to get colostrum right. And we look at quality. And again, if we don't do anything outside of this evening, focusing on nutrition pre-lambing from a perspective of quality colostrum is absolutely essential. Alison mentioned soybean, you know, at 100 grams per lamb. So if you've got twins or triplets, you know, that's a nice metric to use. But that's something that you can work with the team in R.M.Jones about. Maybe what can we do in our flock this year to make sure we've good colostrum quality. Again, quantity, a lamb requires 50 mils per kilo. And we want to get it in as quickly as possible. And something we don't talk about too often with colostrum is clean. We want to make sure that our ewes, as they come up to lambing time, that their udders are as clean as possible. And attention to detail of hygiene around that time is important, because that young sponge, that gut, that sponge is able to digest all those beautiful antibodies, but it's also open for E. coli and other pathogens. So if we have a lot of feces and that lamb is getting up and nudging around, it's never going to hit the teeth first time round. If we've got clean udders and clean underbellies, that helps with colostrum. I think when I think about colostrum management in flocks, I think focus on the diet, the clean udders, bonding, but really a real focus on your triplets and your weak lambs. That's where the real gains can be made, maybe even your twins. They're the high risk lambs. They're the ones that really need to make sure we put extra effort into colostrum. We always get the question around supplements and replacers. Supplements have very little antibodies in them. They're often just energy. Replacers tend to have antibodies in them, and they can vary in quality. There's certainly something I would never advise people to use completely. I'd always try and focus on getting as much, if you can get any store of colostrum yourself on farm, and then topping up with replacers. People often ask about cow's colostrum as well. The problem with cow's colostrum is you've got to pool it to make sure we don't get any immune reactions to the lamb. And the other thing I would say about cow's colostrum is we've got to feed a little bit more of it, because it's not quite the feeding value of your colostrum. But focus on diet would be my key thing. Alison mentioned this, and this is still a big killer of lambs, hypothermia. And when you look at flock at losses, and you know, when you go in and investigate kind of data from farms, it's still a big challenge. And there's a reason that lambs are more prone to it, because lambs have this beautiful energy store. Alison described it, this brown fat here, which is around the kidney. And you can see a lamb here without any brown fat. And often you can think of your twins and triplets, your weaker lambs. You often go into these lambs and they don't have the same brown fat source. It can be impacted by ewe nutrition. So really, it's a big killer of lambs. We want to really focus on how do we manage hypothermia. And again, it's down to the environment, the lambing environment. Colostrum plays a huge role. You know, colostrum and that ewe nutrition plays a huge role. Again, the hard lambing or the triplets, they are going to be more prone. And these lambs will often stand beside the ewe and they'll be trimmering and shaking, and they can even look like they're feeding, but they're not. So we need just like careful attention to detail. I think a warming box is a super tool, and I've seen so many farmers use them and get great results with them over time, and maybe using a thermometer as well to make a decision on what you do. And just quickly on the cold lamb, I've seen a lot of farmers using, I suppose, these principles and really improving sort of critical care of the cold lamb. So if you have a thermometer on farm, what you're looking for is, if a lamb's normal temperature is about 39 to 40 degrees Celsius, under 37 degrees Celsius, these lambs are under a lot of pressure and they really need to be warmed up. If the lamb is under 5 hours of age, you can probably tube them colostrum and put them into the warming box and checking them every 30 minutes. If the lamb is older than 5 hours, if we give them colostrum, what happens is they tend to regurgitate it up, they don't do as well. So in those situations, I would say that intraperitoneal glucose works really, really well. And look, it's hard to describe it on a webinar, but just some landmarks for you there. This is the umbilicus here that you can see that's been dipped with iodine. It's about 2 centimeters to the right or left, and 2 centimeters down is your landmark for the injection. And what we're doing is we're using a needle about 1 inch long, 19 gauge needle, and when we do introduce it, we're actually, this is the angle, so you're aiming for the tail, and we're using typically about 60 mils of 20% glucose dextrose solution, and I think it works really, really well. And it's one of the things, the protocols on farm that I found, it just helps these lambs. Now, if your lambs are still cold and they're over 37 degrees, I find the stomach tube with colostrum and a warm up, and still that warming box is something to consider. Just again, back to basics, but hygiene is absolutely critical. When we think about maybe the ewe and lameness, we think about mastitis in the ewe, but lambs are so susceptible to infections. So just what I think about on farms is, how do we make it easy to do this? How do we set up routines? Where do we put the straw? Where do we put the bucket of lime? How do we wash stomach tubes and equipment, lambing equipment? Do we have a blue barrel? Do we change our disinfectant every 2 days? Simple things like that, and really a focus on, particularly with pets as well, on feeders and routines. And excuse me, and it's about looking for what I describe as bottlenecks. And I think it could be simple. Like, I would go into a lot of flocks and I would just go in and I'd kneel down in the bedding, and if I'm getting up and my knees are wet, then that's a difficult environment. That's the environment that bacteria like, and I really like kind of strict routines, particularly on the lambing pens, having them the right size and space, so that over 2.2 meters squared when there's ewes and lambs together, and have a routine maybe around straw and lime. Just a little mention in here about water. Water is incredibly important, but leaking water troughs can cause a lot of problems, and so how we deliver water into these pens can be a bit of a challenge. And again, how often are we cleaning equipment, and how easy is it? And our own hands can be a big factor, and I'm going to talk a little bit in 2 slides time. So I suppose I want people to go into their own flocks now and think about other hygiene and the process along. Is there areas we can make slight improvements? Even our stomach tubes, being very careful if we're using stomach tubes on farm, that we have a routine, particularly when we think about colostrum, because it's so fatty and it's the ideal growth medium. And if we get a lot of colostrum build up in these stomach tubes, they can be a recipe for infection. Just looking at navel hygiene, just check. That's what I do. I walk through the system and I look for the simple things that we can make slight tweaks on. Just quickly about 2 diseases. So watery mouth is still one of these challenging diseases we see in the first 48 hours. It's caused by an E. coli bacterial infection. And we think about this, we think about infection, pressure and immunity. And colostrum is still the key one here when it comes to watery mouth. So getting good quality, getting the right quantity and getting it in quickly and cleanly. I think I have certainly thought a lot about this challenge on flocks, and I suppose I've moving my own ideas around, where might the future be, and I tend to see, when I see watery mouth issues, I look at water quality, I look at bedding and hygiene, I look at the colostrum piece, and I know we can use antibiotics as a way of prophylaxis of treating these cases, but there's a big shift away from doing that. I've been interested in probiotics and how they might play a role, and on our own farms, you can see here, I'm not sure if the picture is big enough, we're actually using these probiotic solutions as an aerosol now to try and control the bacteria in the environment. And I think there's something in that in the future of watery mouth control. But the big things for me is a focus on colostrum and a focus on hygiene. This is a more difficult one, and this is joint till. So we're seeing definitely from my conversations with farmers over the last 3 or 4 years, more and more cases of joint till. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is, we're seeing a lot of a certain type of bug called Streptococcus dysgalactica, and it's been isolated in about 2/3 of cases. And unfortunately, this bacteria can get into lambs in a lot of ways. It can get in through the nasal passages, typically through the oral passages, through the navel, through tail, castration, or even through tags. So it can be a difficult one to control, and it can be even difficult and very difficult to treat. And even with good colostrum management, and this is the real challenge with this one, and you know, we could talk about probably jointil for the night. It can still, what happens with Strep dysgalactiae is it stays dormant on dry straw, and typically what it really, you'll see a real increase in it where there's issues with damp and changes in weather. So, you know, when I'm looking at jointil problems on flocks, you know, focus again on the basics, but you know, if weather changes, it can be, you know, we really need to be very proactive in what we do. And when it comes to jointil treatments, and I think antibiotics, I'm a big fan of reducing their usage. But always for me, penicillin worked as the best treatment for jointil. But I think one product that we probably don't use enough on, and this is something maybe to talk to your own vet about, is steroids. We're learning about steroids and their role in COVID-19. But with jointil and lambs, if we can get them early, if we can get in with the steroid and the antibiotic, we get a better treatment outcome. But it's always about focusing on prevention. Again, one of the things that I would try and get people to do, and what we did in practice, is we'd perform lamb postmortems at surgery, or we would train shepherds or farmers themselves to do basic postmortems to try and see, was the lamb born alive? Did it suckle? Was there colostrum? What was the brown fat cover like? And I think it's something maybe we need to utilise more on farm, and it's something maybe you could work with your own vet on. It gives us feedback into what we're doing on farm. Just a quick thing on rearing pets. I think we've got better at rearing pets. Certainly one of the things I think we do fall down a little bit on is in feeding systems around hygiene and cleaning those feeding systems. And just, you know, when we tend to set up pets, we tend them up in the back corner of a shed. Just watch ventilation, watch how much space we give them, and I think we're seeing improvement in rearing pet lambs all the time. So I suppose tonight was sort of a rapid run through on lamb health, but I want to ask the question is, where are your weak links? Because, you know, every system I go into, and I know from being involved in farms myself and running farms, is that there's always weak links. And when you get one weak link, something else appears. But it is a way of looking at the system, because I think if we can find these bottlenecks or weak links, we can continuously progress and improve. Just a quick little bit about mastitis and Ewes. When we are talking around lambing time, again, I've seen it's a growing challenge in many flocks, and unfortunately seeing a lot of these streps and staph aureus. What I tend to say to people, if you're seeing a lot of mastitis, is focus in again on feeding on the ewe. Maybe sometimes I've seen it in some flocks here, we have a lot of issues with fluke in this area. Just look at, is there any issue if you're seeing a big increase at flock level? Just look at underlying issues, but you know, look at, again, certain ewes are more prone to mastitis, and marking those ewes down that we're not taking replacements from them. And look at bedding as well, and maybe overuse of lime, that they're in contact with too much lime that can damage teat ends. And again, trying to keep that udder in the dry, warm, or plenty fresh air and dry straw can really help. Okay, so that's it from me. It's about being brilliant at the basics. Maybe it's too basic, I'm not sure. I hope I didn't go too fast tonight. But a real focus on ewe nutrition can have a massive impact on lamb health. Feeding for colostrum quality, just that focus on those weaker twins, triplets, and that hard lambing. You know, there's where we can make real marginal gains. It's that attention to detail at a busy time of year. Make it systematic so it's as easy as possible, that you have all your equipment ready and laid out, easy to find. And focus on space per ewe. Space and lambing pens can be really important. Make routines as easy as they possibly can be. And don't forget your equipment, be it your lambing equipment or your gloves. I didn't say during jointil that the source of this Strep galactea is actually a lot of times can be from Ewes milk or uterine discharges during lambing. So when I see cases of jointil, one of the things I'll do is certainly implement strict hand hygiene and wearing of gloves at lambing time. And put up a whiteboard and start measuring performance, and see where you are. And again, you know, is it something you could do as a group within the area or within R.M.Jones, that you can get together and set out some targets for yourselves, and because a bit of competition is good as well. So that's it for me, John. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Tommy. I think most of us kept up with that pretty well, so that's pretty sound.
We're getting better.
Questions come through, some on my text. I can't see many on the screen. I've had a few WhatsApp ones as well. So I'm going to read them out, and if there's any other questions from anyone, if you go on to the top of the screen where you can see a hand symbol, right to the left of it is a little pop out. Click on there if you've got any questions. We'd like to hear your questions. It makes it a bit more interactive and a bit more, well, even more interesting. So a couple of questions I had from someone is, can we get colostrum tested?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so you can get colostrum tested. Now, they haven't finalized the figures on colostrum, so we're using sort of the measurements that has been well established from measuring calves. And I think the best thing I would do, and I would suggest to flocks, is Brix refractometer. It's about £15 to buy one online, and what you can do is set the same limit, or a little bit higher, I would say, about 24%. So if you're measuring, and particularly the first 10 or 15 samples that come, what you're doing then is you're creating a control, and you're having a look back at the diet, and you're also ensuring that the colostrum you put in is of good quality. So in flocks, it's a sort of a check for how well the job the diet has done for colostrum quality. And it's Brix refractometer. It's pretty simple to use, and I think it's a good step if you want to focus on improving colostrum quality.
Yeah, and just by the way, we can supply those at R.M.Jones, just in case you're interested.
Okay, excellent. Well, there you are, solution.
When it comes to ewe hygiene or teat hygiene, someone's asked, is it a good idea to crutch out your ewes and belly out your ewes pre-lambing to keep them clean, or is that going to cause more issues in other ways?
So before lambing, to actually clean out the shed?
I know, crutch out the bellies of take the wool off the bellies, take the wool off the tails and around the teats of the ewes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, what a great, yeah, no, so yeah, absolutely. It will really help with that hygiene around the udder for the lamb. Absolutely. Okay. So winter shearing is something that we would promote over here from a perspective of improving hygiene, creating, I suppose, less challenge around space as well. So again, anything like that can improve, because, you know, we are intensively, you know, lambing ewes now indoors. We've got to do everything we can, because when they're outdoors, there's other challenges, but when we're bringing them in close together, anything we can do to improve hygiene really helps.
Yeah, I seem to have been off. I said it disappeared. It all disappeared from me. So I didn't quite get the end of that, but I could see the route you were going with it. Yeah. So the next one, someone had a question about third lamb on triplets. I know a lot of people take the third lamb off. And the question was, which lamb should they be taking off? Should they be taking the biggest lamb or the smallest lamb off the ewe?
That's a great question. That's a great question. It was asked in the webinar, the ADHB webinar last week as well, by somebody, and the speaker didn't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I think we need to put a bit of thought into that. I don't really have an opinion. I don't know what you think, Alison. It's very hard to justify maybe taking the biggest lamb. We tend to. It depends what you're. You know, I don't know the answer to that. Is the honest question.
If anyone's got any answers to that and wants to put them in the chat box, it'd be interesting to find out, really.
I suppose it depends on how they're looking after pet lambs, doesn't it? If they've got them on a machine and they've got them, I don't know. It's a question I've never been asked before.
Yeah, it's kind of a reversal of what we were thinking. Should we be taking the strongest lamb, not the weakest lamb?
Mm-hmm.
Because the weaker lambs are then on the udder and getting the best dew, where the stronger lamb has more chance of, as you said, Alison, going to the feeder with the pet lambs and probably surviving better. It's an interesting one. If it was my farm, I'd probably keep going with taking the weakest lamb, to be honest with you.
Okay. Here we go. We've got a comment here, which is, leave the most equal pair on the ewe, take the odd one out. Yeah, that was from, I can't see how that's from, actually. Then someone, obviously, when you were talking about bedding up lambs, someone's asked, do we need to clean out the pens, which I used to hate, but I used to do it, or can we just bed them up with clean straw? I'll take the worst egg any afterbirth out, obviously bed them up with clean straw and lime them up or stalisand them up.
Yeah, it's a good question, and again, it's back down to, if you're not getting issues with lamb mortality, then don't change a thing. Don't listen to Tommy tonight and his advice on hygiene, you're getting it right. But if you're seeing significant losses and watery mouth issues, or issues with cold lambs, you've got to really focus in on hygiene and how routinely are you bedding up. And I would say in most cases then we would look at bedding up in between lambings for your individual pens. And I would again look at the structure of the shed, and sometimes I change that around to see pre-lambing obviously is to what jobs are you doing over the 24 hours of lambing. And if you're going to be doing a lot of bedding, where do you put the straw and where do you put the single lambs to make that as easy as possible? But I would say to do it in between lambs, I would try and do it if you're trying to get over challenges. If you don't have time, then go with extra straw and don't put 2 or 3 ewes through the same pen. I just find that fresh straw and cleaning out the old straw helps, particularly with watering them out.
Okay, that's good. I think there's lots of people out there, lots of farmers' sons or lots of students who will be going, "Oh, fuck, it depends that again." But yeah, it's a job I remember doing. There was one other question that came up, which was about painkillers. When you say painkillers from your vet, with not the same products as adrenocane for dehorn or anything like that, but steroid painkillers, I would imagine.
Yeah, so apologies, I should have cleared that up. So we often get confused when we use the word painkillers. When I talk about those medications and their prescription medicines is anti-inflammatories. And unfortunately, we've no licensed anti-inflammatories in either the UK or Ireland. It's a bit of a challenge, but they are available for sheep. So your products that maybe sheep farmers would know as products like Hexasolol A, which includes an oxytetracycline and an anti-inflammatory together. Sheep farmers will be very familiar with Metacam as well. It works wonders in sheep because it lasts for 3 days. Again, not licensed to the best of my knowledge at the moment, but can be available through Cascade. So your local anaesthetic is a different product. So it's an anti-inflammatory drug. Your steroid is an anti-inflammatory as well, but I wouldn't be giving that to ewes at lambing time.
Okay. I can't see any other questions come up. If you've got any questions, please poke them up there for Tommy and Alison. They're here for a bit longer. If not, we're going to go. But I'll give you another 30 seconds. While you're thinking of that, we have some more talks coming up during the next couple of months. We have some on brassicas and what the right green crops to be grown for this coming season and for both the summer and the winter. And then we have a grassland talk about herbal lays and diverse swards. It's quite a buzzword at the moment, so we'll be looking at a session on that one evening. There's no more questions. Oh, everyone's got to sleep, I think, now. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you very much to Alison. Thank you very much to Tommy. And we'll hopefully catch up with him later in the season. And hopefully you have a good lambing and it works. Oh, here we go. Well, we're getting a couple of questions. They've all started turning up in a hurry. Let's have a look, see what they are. Are there any probiotic supplements to give newborn lambs instead of antibiotic spectrum?
Yeah, there's a number of them. Look, they vary in quality. I'm sort of learning about them now. What I prefer to see, and maybe Alison would have an opinion on this, is I like to see some of the newer products are liquid probiotics, which means that the key thing with these bacteria, from what I'm learning, is that if we're using freeze-dried probiotics for E. coli now and Watery mouth, is that you need something that goes in there quite quickly. So I'm quite interested in these liquid probiotics. I'd be very cautious about giving out brand names now to say that there's a brilliant one, or it's something I'm trying to learn about myself. And certainly working with some flocks around that have been challenged with E. coli, we're looking at using some of the liquid probiotics. Alison, do you have an opinion on the probiotics?
Nothing more really than what you've already said, Tommy. I mean, there's no brand in particular, but there are plenty out there. And I think it's a really interesting market as well, just looking at that sort of effect of prebiotics and probiotics as well, and just that effect for building that immune system and gut health.
Yeah, we are trialing a prebiotic, a probiotic, and a postbiotic is the new terminology on our farm at the moment. But it's a dairy farm. We're getting some interesting results. But to me, and I'm trying to figure this out from a sheep perspective, I think it's getting in early with something that's really active. When you have a freeze-dried probiotic with E. coli, it takes time for that probiotic to get in and activate, which is 24 to 36 hours. So you need something that's active, live, going in there straight away. So it's an interesting space as we come under pressure around antibiotic usage.
I've just seen a comment come up from one of the R.M.Jones staff, actually, which says, R.M.Jones had a brilliant product called Lamb Response, just in case you wanted to know that, everyone. Okay. So get in and get your stuff now. And then I had another question, which is, how good is the quality of powdered colostrum? Well, again, the R.M.Jones colostrum comes out the best in all the trial work. But Tommy and Alison, I'll get your responses.
Yeah, it's a question that comes up every time, and I've actually heard a very prominent sheep vet in the UK quote the R.M.Jones, or I think would I be right in saying what's the name of the colostrum placer?
Lamb Force. Down on Lamb.
Yeah, so
I'm sure someone's going to type it up because I've seemed to have forgotten all of a sudden.
So it is. Just be careful. Look, again, they have a role to play. Some of them are just supplements and they don't have any of the antibodies in them. Some of them will have quite high levels of antibodies. And again, if we're using them, I quite like the Genetics range, and Alison would probably agree with me, because they're full fat colostrum replacers. And that would be my own personal preference. But I'd always still focus on mother's milk if we can. I would never be over reliant on replacers. Yeah, we do our own products, obviously, and the Downham product does come out quite high in all. Well, it comes out the highest in all the trials, so it's pretty good. Is there any more questions from anyone? I'm sure there's got to be one more squeezed out there somewhere. Oh, okay, maybe there's not. So in the meantime, let's say thank you. Oh, hang on, there is. Who's this? God, we're squeezing them out slowly. Any advantage in using wood shavings instead of straw in pens? Great question. So wood shavings, I would have said no, because as an insulator, they're very, very poor. So straw has two functions to me. It obviously keeps the lamb and the ewes clean, but it also is a fantastic insulator. Wood shavings doesn't have the same insulation. Now, saying that, on our own dairy farms here, we're actually using wood shavings this year on our calves, but we're using wood shavings and straw on top of it to try and save straw and doing some things with microbes and stuff like that. But as a general rule, wood shavings on their own, they tend to be quite poor insulators. Poor at insulating.
Okay, well, I think we'll stop there and say thank you very much to Alison and Tommy. That was really informative. There was lots of information came out there, and this recording is available afterwards. We can forward on to anyone if you missed it or missed some of it, or you know someone else wants to watch it, and just talk to one of your on farm when the staff will come out on the farm, or when you go into a farm shop or farm centre, and we can get it forwarded on to you. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll say good night. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Super.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.